In this video, we're going to take a look at number 17, Actions and Outlets. Right now I'm in the book, Intro to App Development with Swift. And you can take a look and read through this chapter on your own. But I'm going to walk through and show you all of the steps that are happening that we're creating with this app. We're going to create an app that shows you how to use storyboards and how to connect controls and hook them up with code and all sorts of fun stuff. So I want to move this off screen and let's go to the source code. Now if you open up the code that was provided in 17 Actions and Outlets, you can actually see a completed version of this project. Now if you find after going through this tutorial or after reading the book that you feel like you've missed something, you can always come into this project and see it in action, and this is what we're going to build. But because we're smarter than that, we're not going to start with this. We're going to close this out. Let's go ahead and open Xcode and then create a new project. If you don't see that opening screen, you can always go File, New, and choose New Project. We're going to select iOS and we want a single view application. Go ahead and click Next. Let's call this Color Mix, and we want Swift. You can uncheck any unit or UI tests, so we won't worry about that for this video. Choose Next. Now we want to save this somewhere on your computer. I'm putting this on the desktop. I don't want source control at the moment. We'll review that in another video, but for now you can uncheck that. Go ahead and click Create. Alright, so this gives us the starting point for our app, and there's a couple of things we're going to look at. First, we want to look at the main.storyboard. This represents the visual elements that are on the screen, and so here we have what we call a view controller, and notice here if I select the little yellow circle that represents the view controller, it has two things. There is a visual representation which is in the storyboard, and it has connected to it the source code or the file that represents all of the code that relates to those objects that are on the screen. Now notice here view controller, you'll notice this is quite large. Remember, if you go to Xcode and preferences, and then if you select fonts and colors, you can change the size of your text. This is how I would normally be coding because you can see a lot more. It's a lot easier to read. But for the video, I'm going to use presentation. So the text will be a bit large. Let's go back to the main.storyboard. If I select the view controller, then come over here to the inspector panel and notice here on this identity inspector, there's a reference to view controller. There's the source code that this visual object is connected to. Everything we add here on this view will be something we want to reference in code in the view controller. So let's come over here to the object library, which has quite a few things. You can kind of expand that. This has all sorts of, these are all the built-in visual controls or other UI elements that you can use with the iOS SDK. Now because this list is so long, I mean there's quite a bit here, you can use this filter, and so I'm going to search for view, and the view that I want is this one right here. If I click and drag, notice how it brings up a rectangle, and I'll just go ahead and let go. This is called a UI view. Notice if you select this, notice how it has this faint text refers to this as a UI view. Everything that has a visual representation is going to be based off of a UI view. So this is kind of the fundamental building block. Now, if I want to connect this to my source code, first of all, I can come over here and I can show the assistant editor. Click that. And it's going to open the source code. Now I can slide this over so I can see it. Okay, now to make a connection from here to here, I literally I hold the control key, I click with my mouse, and I drag. Now notice how I have this little line that's following me. I'm still holding the control key and I'm still holding my mouse key. And if I let go, let's say I let go over here, it's going to open a context menu relative to whatever I let go. I want to click away. I want to press control again, holding control. I'm going to click and drag, and let's go back over to the code. Now notice here, now I can insert, it has some insert points. I want to put this towards the top. Go ahead and let go. And we're going to call this a color view. And then go ahead and click connect. Now, notice what it's done. I'm going to click over, I'm going to add a little space so we can see this easier. So notice this keyword here, IB outlet. That means that this is connected to IB, stands for Interface Builder, which is kind of this view that we're looking over here where you have all these tools and everything to visually lay out. That's called Interface Builder. And this is a variable, and it's of type UI view. Now notice this UI view type has an exclamation point. The reason for that is if this color view doesn't exist, it's going to crash. It's going to throw an error. It means that this is required to exist. Now notice over here in this little gutter there is an outlet, and notice how when I mouse over it, it tells me what I'm connected to. Now let's say this wasn't there and it was just an empty circle. That would mean that there's nothing connected to it. Now why would that happen? Well, if I come over here and let's say I delete this UI view, notice how this is now empty and there's nothing there to reference. Well, if I go back and I click and drag my view and I put this here, I can now go from the source code, I can click and drag and go back. Now I have a connection. Another thing you can do, if you right click, notice how I get a context menu and I have, now it says referencing outlets, UI view controller. That's the class, the source code that holds the reference, this color view. See that? We'll review that a little bit later. One other thing you can note, right now when I click away, you can see this box. If you don't see that box, you're going to go click Editor, choose Canvas, and then choose Show Bounds Rectangles. If I undo that, then notice how I can't really see where things are. If I, because this is how it looks on the device. But if I'm in the editor and I want to see where everything is, I can say Show Bounds Rectangles. This only applies to Interface Builder. You won't see this on the device. This is just for helping lay out things. All right, let's go back to Interface Builder, clicking the view controller, and I want to find another object, and I'm going to undo that, and I'm looking for a switch. Now, if I click this, I click and drag, I can set that here. Now, I have the switch, and you've seen this before, of course. When you click a switch, it's either on or off. If you come over here to the inspector window and I select this attributes inspector, notice here it says value. You have value on or off. When you change this here, this sets the starting value. When the app runs, it's either going to be off or on, and in my case I want this to be off. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, now the next question is, how do we connect this to the source code? Well, we do the same thing, only this time, instead of an outlet, I want to reference this with what we call an action. So press Control, click on that, and click and drag, and place it below the other functions. And we're going to change this. Notice how we have action, so select that to be action, and then under any we want it to be UI switch, and then we're going to say switch changed and go ahead and click connect. Now what this did is it automatically added some code for us, a function, and the keyword IB action, and it has the same little indicator here. So again, we're connecting from the storyboard, which is the visual layout, to the source code, which are these text files here. So we have a function, and the function expects what we call a sender, which means something called this method, and what called it is going to be a UI switch. We want to now do something when we change this switch. Let's go ahead and change the background of the color view. So we're going to say color view dot background color equals, we're going to say dot red. Okay, let's go ahead and run this. Now I'm just going to select something like the 6S, and let's run it. Alright, so here we have the iPhone 6S. If you happen to have the window and it's way bigger than you expected, remember you can go to Window and choose Scale. I could probably get away with 75%. That's pretty good. Alright, now notice again over here on the left is the interface builder within Xcode. Notice again this boundary is just visual for when you're editing. Notice it doesn't exist here. Alright, what happens is we click our switch and hey, check it out, we have red. What happens now if I hold on, wait a minute, what's going on? Okay, we got to fix that. Well, it's doing this because that's what we told it to do. We just said, hey, turn it on. Let's go ahead and close. I'm going to stop that running. Now, let's update this code. And you remember where we had the code that says if you're making a choice, if it's one thing, do this. If it's another, do that. So the way this works, we're using an if-else statement. So I'm going to delete this line. I'm going to say if, and then remember sender. Sender represents the UI switch object, and there's a property called isOn. If sender.isOn, then we're going to say color view dot background color equals dot red, else color view dot background color equals dot white. Alright, let's save that. I just pressed Command S to save. It automatically saves when you run it, but anyway, I get into a habit of just saving every time. Let's go ahead and run that, see how that looks. Alright, so if I click my switch, there it's on, very good. Click, and now it's off. Cool. Awesome. Alright, let's do a little bit more. Go ahead and stop this. Now, we want to add a few more switches. Let's change this up a little bit. So go ahead and select the switch that's already there and press Command D. What that does is it duplicates it. If I click and drag, notice how you get these indicators. There's a lot of little guides that help you. So here we're centering it, and then if I press Command D one more time, I want to center it, and notice how I can kind of line these up. Alright, very good. Now we're going to create, we're going to reference these switches. Now notice we don't have an outlet for the switch for any of these, so let's fix that. So press Control, click and drag, and let's call this red switch, and notice it's an outlet, and we click Connect. Let's go here and select here and press Control, click and drag, and let's call this green switch. Press Connect, and then finally the third one, click and drag, and call this blue switch. Awesome. Now I want you to notice something. If I come back over here and I right click, notice how we have the reference red switch view controller, and the view changed was connected to switch change. Well, guess what? If I right click here, notice it has the same thing because it already had code connected to it. Because I had already, when I duplicated it, it kept the action. So this switch will also call switch changed, and this switch will also call switch changed. So what that means is for actions, you can have multiple objects calling the same action. But for outlets, you can only have one object connected to another outlet. Keep that in mind. Now, the next step is, well, if they're all calling this same method, how do we make sure that we're responding to the correct switch? Because we know each one of these switches, we can have a check that says, hey, if red is on, do this. If blue is on, do this. If green is on, do that. So let's update this code. I'm going to go ahead and delete this because we're going to change this up quite a bit. Follow along here. This is from the book. I'm just going to type it as we go. We're going to create a few variables. So we're going to say var red, and it's going to be of type CG float. And we're going to say equals 0, and we're going to say var green of type CG float equals 0, var blue CG float equals 0. Then we're going to make a check. We're going to say if red switch dot is on, remember we have that property we can check, then we're going to say red equals 1. I'm going to say if green switch is on, oops, then I'm going to say green equals 1. And finally, if blue switch is on, blue equals 1. And then I want to scroll down here a little bit, give myself some room. Then I'm going to create a color and assign it to the color view. And the way we do that is we say let color, which is, I'm just going to assign it to UI color. And UI color has an object, allows us to create a color by mixing values. And I want where it says red, green, blue, so I'm going to select that. So now the autocomplete suggests everything I need. So I'm just going to say red, and then I'm going to tab, and I'm going to type green, then I'm going to tab again, and see how that's selected? Now I'm going to say blue, and then I'm going to tab once more, so I was tabbing twice, and then alpha is 1. Then we're going to say color view dot background color equals color. Okay, let's talk through what we have done. We're using a new type called CG float. It's basically the same as a float, but it's used within relation to what they call core graphics. You don't have to know that. Just understand that it's a type of float. And a float is something that can be a decimal point, right? What happens is we initialize these variables by saying they're equal to 0. Then if something changes, if the red switch is on, we're going to change it this color. We're going to set this to 1 and set this to 1 if the green is switched or the blue is switched. Then based on that combination, we set that as a color. UI color is an object that generates a color, and it takes in these values red, green, blue, and alpha. Alpha is how transparent something is. And then you set it to the background color. So let's go ahead and look at that and see how that worked. All right, so now we have our switch color switches. So here's red. Notice how when I changed it, it automatically updated. And then, hey, there's blue. Check it out. And finally, hey, it went white. If we undo, there we go. We get a blue, and then there's green, and there's yellow. What else? Awesome. Ooh, and we can even make black. That's cool. Very good. All right, let's close out of that. So the next thing we want to do is update this, add it, make it a little, give it a little more variety.